Before the sun rose over Rome, before the servants stirred and the senators gathered and the weight of an empire pressed down on a single pair of shoulders, one man sat alone in the dark with nothing but a candle, a pen, and the ruthless honesty of his own thoughts. He was the most powerful person alive. He commanded armies that stretched across continents. He held the fate of millions in his hands. And yet every single morning, without exception, he began his day by reminding himself how small he was, how fleeting his time was, and how much work he still had left to do on the only thing he could truly control, himself. That man was Marcus Aurelius. And what he wrote in those quiet hours was never meant for your eyes. It was never meant for anyone's eyes. It was a private conversation between a man and his conscience, a daily reckoning with the gap between who he was and who he was determined to become. No performance, no audience, no applause, just the raw, unfiltered work of a human being who understood something that most people spend their entire lives running away from, that the greatest battle you will ever fight is not out there in the world. It is in here, inside the 6 inches between your ears, in the first moments of every single morning before the world tells you who to be. Most people wake up and immediately surrender. They hand their minds over to their phones, to the news, to the noise, to the endless stream of other people's opinions and agendas and emergencies. They begin their day in reaction, and they spend the rest of it wondering why they feel so empty, so scattered, so far from the life they imagined for themselves. They are living on autopilot inside a machine that was specifically designed to keep them there. And the tragedy is not that the machine is powerful. The tragedy is that they never even realized they had a choice. Marcus Aurelius made a different choice every morning. For decades, through plague and war and grief and betrayal and the crushing loneliness of absolute power, he made the same choice to begin the day by owning his mind before anything else could claim it. And the 10 things he practiced in those early hours were not complicated. They were not the exclusive property of emperors or philosophers or people with perfect circumstances. They are available to every single person watching this right now, including you, including me, starting tomorrow morning. What you are about to discover is not a morning routine. It is a philosophy of life compressed into the first hours of your day. It is the difference between drifting through your existence and deliberately designing it. It is the difference between being a person things happen to and being a person who decides what happens. Marcus Aurelius figured this out 2,000 years ago. The only question that matters right now is whether you are finally ready to listen. Marcus Aurelius woke up every single morning knowing he was the most powerful man in the world, and still chose to begin his day in silence, reflection, and deliberate thought. He didn't reach for distraction. He didn't rush into the demands of empire. He sat with his thoughts, examined his soul, and prepared his mind before he ever interacted with the world. That discipline, that sacred relationship with the early hours of the day, is what made him not just a great emperor, but one of the most admired human beings in all of recorded history. The morning to Marcus Aurelius was not simply the start of a schedule. It was a ritual of becoming. Every day presented itself as a fresh opportunity to align his actions with his values, to recommit to the principles he held sacred, and to steel himself against the inevitable difficulties that lay ahead. He understood something that most people today have forgotten, that how you begin your day determines how you live your day, and how you live your day ultimately determines the quality of your entire life. In his private journal, which we now know as the Meditations, Marcus wrote to himself with brutal honesty. He wasn't performing for an audience. He wasn't crafting a philosophy to sell to the masses. He was holding himself accountable in the quiet hours before the world came knocking. He reminded himself of his duties, questioned his impulses, challenged his comfort, and returned again and again to the Stoic principles that governed his thinking. This practice of morning reflection was not occasional. It was constant, disciplined, and deeply intentional. What strikes the modern reader most powerfully is how relevant this practice remains. We live in a world that has perfected the art of stealing our attention before we've even had a chance to claim it. The moment most people open their eyes, they open their phones. They flood their minds with news, notifications, social media, and the opinions of others, all before they've had a single original thought of their own. They hand over the most precious real estate in their day, that quiet window between sleep and full wakefulness, to algorithms designed to provoke, stimulate, and distract. Marcus Aurelius never faced a smartphone, but he understood the human tendency toward distraction, and he guarded against it with everything he had. The discipline of dawn, as Marcus practiced it, rested on several interconnected pillars. The first was the practice of memento mori, the conscious remembrance that life is finite. Each morning he reminded himself that he would not live forever, that the day ahead was a gift and not a guarantee. This wasn't a morbid exercise, it was a clarifying one. When you remember that your time is limited, you stop wasting it on things that don't matter. You become more intentional with your hours. You stop postponing the things that truly deserve your energy and attention. The second pillar was the practice of negative visualization, a Stoic technique in which you mentally prepare yourself for difficulty before it arrives. Marcus would anticipate the frustrations, the ungrateful people, the setbacks, and the obstacles he was likely to encounter throughout his day. Not to cultivate pessimism, but to cultivate resilience. When you have already imagined the difficulty, you are not blindsided by it when it appears. You meet it with steadiness rather than reaction. In a modern context, this translates directly into the practice of mental preparation, visualizing challenges, planning responses, and entering the day from a place of readiness rather than naivety. The third pillar was the commitment to purpose. Every morning, Marcus returned to the question of what he was here to do. For him, the answer was rooted in Stoic philosophy: to serve others, to act with virtue, to fulfill his role with excellence and integrity. He didn't allow himself the luxury of drifting through his days without direction. Purpose was his compass, and the morning was the moment he recalibrated it. In the modern world, this translates into the simple but profound practice of beginning each day by asking yourself what truly matters, what you are building, and whether your actions are aligned with the person you are trying to become. What is remarkable about Marcus Aurelius is that he practiced all of this not when life was easy, but when it was extraordinarily hard. He ruled during a period of plague, war, political betrayal, and personal grief. He lost children. He faced military campaigns that stretched on for years. He governed an empire that was beginning to fracture at its edges, and yet every morning he returned to his practice. He returned to the page. He returned to the discipline of examining himself before he went out to face the world. That consistency, maintained not in ideal conditions but in the midst of chaos, is perhaps the most powerful lesson he offers us. The discipline of dawn is not about waking up at 5 in the morning or following a rigid checklist of productivity habits. It is about something far deeper and more meaningful. It is about claiming ownership of your mind before the world attempts to claim it for you. It is about beginning each day with intention rather than reaction, with clarity rather than confusion, with purpose rather than drift. It is about understanding that the inner life is not a luxury. It is the foundation upon which everything else is built. Marcus Aurelius, emperor of Rome, philosopher, soldier, and father, understood this truth more clearly than almost any leader who has ever lived. He understood that the real battle was always an internal one, and that the morning was where that battle was first engaged and first won. If we are wise enough to learn from him, we will stop treating the early hours of our day as dead time to be filled with noise, and start treating them as sacred time to be filled with the kind of reflection, preparation, and intention that transforms ordinary people into extraordinary ones. In the time of Marcus Aurelius, distraction was still a very real and very human problem. The forums of Rome buzzed with gossip, political intrigue, and endless noise. People chase pleasure, status, and the approval of others with the same desperate energy that people today chase likes, followers, and viral moments. Human nature has not fundamentally changed. What has changed is the sophistication and scale of the machinery built to exploit it. And that is precisely why the Stoic wisdom of a 2nd century Roman emperor speaks with such startling urgency to the modern world. Marcus Aurelius lived at the center of one of the most powerful and chaotic civilizations ever constructed. As emperor, he was surrounded by people who wanted things from him, advisors who competed for his attention, and a constant stream of crises demanding immediate response. He could have allowed himself to be swept along by all of it. Most people in his position would have. Instead, he developed a practice of radical intentionality that allowed him to remain grounded, focused, and philosophically centered no matter what the external world threw at him. That practice, rooted in Stoic philosophy, is what we now recognize as the antidote to the epidemic of distraction defining modern life. The Stoics made a fundamental distinction that changes everything once you truly internalize it. They divided all of existence into two categories: things within our control and things outside of it. Within our control are our thoughts, our judgments, our desires, and our responses. Outside of our control is virtually everything else: the weather, the opinions of others, the news cycle, the economy, and the thousand unpredictable variables that make up daily life. Marcus returned to this distinction constantly, using it as a filter through which he evaluated where to direct his attention and energy. The modern world desperately needs this filter. Today, the average person spends several hours each day consuming content that is almost entirely outside the category of things they can control. They scroll through news designed to provoke outrage. They monitor social media platforms engineered by some of the most sophisticated behavioral psychologists on the planet to maximize engagement through emotional stimulation. They fill every quiet moment with podcasts, videos, and notifications, never allowing their minds the stillness required for genuine thought. The result is a population that is simultaneously more informed and more confused, more connected and more isolated, more stimulated and more purposeless than any generation in human history. Marcus Aurelius would have recognized this pattern immediately. He wrote extensively about the danger of allowing the mind to be colonized by external noise. He warned against the habit of constantly seeking input from the outside world as a substitute for developing clarity from within. He understood that a mind perpetually bombarded with external stimulation loses its capacity for deep thought, sound judgment, and authentic self-knowledge. The Stoic morning practice he maintained was, in essence, a daily act of resistance against exactly this kind of mental colonization. The Stoic habits that Marcus cultivated each morning were designed to create what we might today call psychological sovereignty, the ability to inhabit your own mind fully, to think your own thoughts clearly, and to respond to the world from a place of considered intention rather than conditioned reaction. He began by reading and writing philosophy, not as an academic exercise, but as a practical technology for mental clarity. He examined his thoughts, challenged his assumptions, and deliberately chose the values that would guide his behavior throughout the day. By the time the demands of empire reached him, his mind was already fortified. In our distracted modern world, this translates into a set of practices that are simple in description, but demanding in execution. It means creating genuine boundaries around your attention, not as an occasional experiment, but as a daily discipline. It means choosing each morning what you will allow into your mind and what you will refuse. It means understanding that your attention is not just a resource to be managed, but a reflection of your values. What you consistently give your attention to is, in the deepest sense, what you are saying matters most to you. And for most people today, the gap between what they claim to value and where their attention actually goes is enormous. Marcus also understood something about the social dimension of distraction that remains profoundly relevant. He was deeply aware of the human tendency to seek validation, to perform for others, to shape one's behavior around the expectations and judgments of the crowd. The Stoics called this living according to opinion rather than living according to nature and reason. It is perhaps the oldest form of distraction there is, the constant monitoring of how you appear to others rather than who you actually are. Social media has taken this ancient human vulnerability and amplified it to a scale that would have been unimaginable to Marcus. But his diagnosis of the problem and his prescription for addressing it remain entirely intact. The prescription is this: return every single morning to your own inner life. Before you look outward, look inward. Before you seek the opinions of others, form your own. Before you allow the world to define your agenda, define it yourself. This is not selfishness. It is the foundation of genuine contribution. A person who has not examined their own mind, clarified their own values, and grounded themselves in their own purpose cannot offer anything truly meaningful to the world around them. They can only react, perform, and consume. The Stoic morning practice applied to modern life is ultimately an act of reclamation. It is the daily decision to reclaim your mind from the forces that seek to exploit it, to reclaim your time from the systems designed to steal it, and to reclaim your sense of self from a culture that profits from your confusion and insecurity. Marcus Aurelius did this every morning in ancient Rome. We must find the courage and the discipline to do it every morning in the modern world. The noise has grown louder, but the practice remains the same. Go inward first, so that when you go outward, you go with clarity, purpose, and an unshakable sense of who you are and what you are here to do. There is a particular kind of leadership that the modern world has largely forgotten. It is not the leadership of charisma, of performance, of carefully managed personal brands and motivational slogans. He maintained it when he was exhausted, when he was grieving, and when the philosophical principles he held dear were producing results that were difficult to accept. The discipline was not contingent on favorable conditions. It was the response to all conditions, favorable and unfavorable alike. That is the hallmark of genuine self-mastery, not the ability to perform well when everything is going your way, but the ability to remain fundamentally yourself when everything is not. For the modern person navigating a world of unprecedented complexity and pressure, this model of leadership offers something that no productivity system or motivational framework can provide on its own. It offers a foundation. Before the strategies, before the habits, before the goal setting and the time blocking and the optimization, there must be a person who has done the foundational work of knowing who they are, what they value, and what kind of life they are genuinely trying to build. Without that foundation, all the techniques in the world produce nothing more than efficient movement in whatever direction the current is flowing. With it, even modest external resources can be directed with extraordinary precision and effect. Marcus Aurelius also understood something profound about the relationship between self-mastery and the treatment of others. He wrote repeatedly about the duty to serve, to contribute, to treat every human being with dignity and consideration, regardless of their status or behavior. But he understood that this kind of genuine generosity toward others was only possible for a person who had first developed a stable and grounded relationship with themselves, a person who is internally chaotic, who is driven by unexamined fears and uncontrolled appetites, cannot truly serve others. They can only use others as instruments for managing their own internal disorder. Real leadership, the kind that actually elevates the people around it, flows from a place of interior wholeness that must be cultivated deliberately and protected fiercely. This is the deepest lesson of the emperor's mindset. It is not about power in the conventional sense. It is not about dominance, authority, or the ability to command. It is about the quiet, sustained, daily work of becoming someone whose inner life is ordered enough, clear enough, and strong enough to be genuinely useful in the world. Marcus Aurelius sat with his journal every morning, not because he had already achieved that standard, but because he understood that achieving it was the work of a lifetime, and that every single morning was an opportunity to begin again. That understanding, more than any title or achievement, is what made him truly great. Marcus Aurelius died in the year 180 AD, far from Rome, on a military campaign, having spent the final years of his life doing exactly what he had always done, serving, sacrificing, and showing up with everything he had for something larger than himself. He never retired to comfort. He never reached a point where he decided he had done enough. He died still in the work, still in the practice, still in the daily discipline of becoming. And when they found his journal, the private pages he had written to no one but himself across the most demanding decades of his life, they discovered something that changed the course of human philosophy forever. They discovered a man who was not performing greatness. He was simply, quietly, relentlessly practicing it every single morning until his very last breath. That is what these 10 things are really about. Not productivity, not optimization, not the kind of surface-level self-improvement that makes you feel busy without making you better. They are about the oldest and most important project a human being can undertake, the project of becoming someone whose inner life is strong enough, clear enough, and grounded enough to actually handle the life they are living and build the life they are dreaming of.